Yeah, welcome to our show, which is called The Integral on Air, where we will offer interviews with people who are engaged in the integral worldview. I'm Heidi Hörnlein. I'm a transformational coach, and I'm an integral practitioner for many, many years. And here is my husband, which I have got to know by integral topics.
Hey.
He is Mark Davenport, and he is a counselor and a student of integral for many years too. This episode is called How We Future Generations Grow Up the Spiral. And we have here as a special guest David Long. David is an integral artist and a philosopher. And we ask him afterwards to tell something about himself. First of all, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. It was a very good idea of you guys to try to bring the conversation more into the community. I'm excited about that.
What would you like to tell people who don't know anything about you, for starters, as an introduction?
All right. Well, I am an artist. I like to paint. I'm a musician. I do like integral, philosophical, psychedelic, blues, hip hop kind of music. You can listen and download for free. I have links and all that stuff on my web page. It's iam-davidlong.net, and it's
davidlong-net. Okay.
iam-davidlong.net.
Yes. Thank you.
And yeah, it's going to be up soon. It's not fully up right now, but it'll probably be up by the time a lot of people watch this video. So go there. You'll be able to check out more talks and notes and videos and music and paintings from me.
Yeah, is this a painting of yours on the back side?
Yes, I got a couple paintings behind me. Sometimes I have this one sort of style and theme that I do, which is called cells in infinite flux, and it's like a lot of these little bubble cell things and infinity signs, and it's kind of a different way of thinking about individuals and environments and societies and the way that they affect each other, and also kind of a different way of thinking about the way the spiral expresses itself, where you might have, like, an outer core that is expressing a particular type of meme, with inner cores that are kind of also all resonating, because one of the things that we say in spiral dynamics is that you're not on the spiral, you're not like a color or like a stage, but the spiral is in you, and we transcend and include all of these stages, and we're a colorful, exploding, dynamic, unique kind of thing in flux, not just a hard and fast yellow or green or blue or whatever.
Oh, right. Maybe. That's great. I can see there's more programs already lining up here. So the thing that led us to contact you, David, was a recent video that you posted on Facebook, which talked about what happens now as this spiral is unfolding, and how that affects the people who are entering the spiral now at relatively advanced levels.
Could we please, before, explain what we are talking about?
Exactly.
Because David talked about colors, which are wonderful in his paintings, and in some way maybe connected to the colors we are talking about here, and he talked about memes. And I think it's time that we, also the word spiral dynamics itself came up. So it's time that we talk about what we are talking about,
Yeah.
I do a little screen share. We want to explain to our listeners what spiral dynamics is in just 2 or 3 minutes. Let's see if we can get it. And for that, we have here
A backwards view.
here,
There it is.
Here it
Okay.
is. So we begin, when you are seeing here, our lives in that what we, not we, but Don Beck, who is the father of spiral dynamics, has given the color beige. Because as he lived in South Africa, where colors, white and black and so on, you shouldn't use that so much. He used all sorts of really colorful colors to describe the levels of growth. And you know, we are growing. Everybody knows that children begin in a certain stage, and until they are adults, they go through several developmental stages. And that's more or less what we want to explain here. No, beige is just the survival stage of an infant. Then comes the next stage.
Santa Claus.
We believe in all these things, and the eyes whiten because magic things are happening. And then comes the red, impulsive, egocentric stage, where we try out to find out who we are and what we can do in this world.
Yeah, and we're pissed off that we're not the whole world.
And that we cannot do everything because our power is limited. And then we learn rules. We adapt ourselves to our society, to our peer group, whatever it is. We respect the rules.
We learn to wait for satisfaction.
And then we come into orange. And orange is where we want to achieve something.
We are individuals and we can do whatever we set out to do. We are rational. We can think our way through problems. We can manipulate the world with science and technology.
Yeah, and this, talking about ages, which we didn't so far, this is more or less teenagers are going into this stage. They can get into this.
They can get into that stage. Yes.
And then comes the next stage we want to talk about. It's the green stage, the egalitarian stage. It's all about coming together, love, make love, not war, you know. These, you might have heard all these terms.
Yeah, all marginal groups are included. People who used to be left out of consideration are now part of our care.
Yeah. And then there are some other stages which might not be so interesting just now, as we are doing this as a, let's say, an introductory event, no? And so I would say we give it over to you, David, if you want to add something.
Elaborate a little bit. Yeah, well, the important thing to remember is that the spiral doesn't just apply to individuals and their own personal growth, but it applies to societies and the development of ideas through time as well. Kind of a good way to, like some people talk about the noosphere or something like that, which is this kind of spectrum of ideas that have developed through time. And so this is kind of a map, in a sense, of ideas emerging at different levels, talking to and reacting to each other. The red, impulsive, egoic, no, me, mine, I want it now of a little kid has to give way to authority, to the rules if it wants to be able to succeed, and it needs to figure out some kind of rational way to do that. These things, they're about being able to take more and more perspectives and also take into account more and more factors. And so also a person might have an idea that's really high they've heard about and they grabbed onto, and that's maybe they might also be holding on to some ideas down here that are, you know, a little bit older and maybe a little bit more antiquated that need to be dealt with, and that's holding them down. And the same thing could be said for societies. There are individuals in societies who are more mature and they're pulling up the society, and then there are ones that are less mature and they're pulling it down. And then we sort of talk about the general sort of central level as like the altitude or something like that, and then there's these dynamic pulls on the altitude of society in both ways that I mentioned by individuals, and all of that shapes the expression of the spiral through time.
Could we try to find an example, maybe the newborn child? What is in the consciousness of a newborn child, which is in the beige altitude, which we saw, the very beginning of the spiral of life we are going on?
Yeah. Well, another way to think of it is much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Sure.
So we say that at the lower stages, especially beige, and babies are pre-egoic. The way that you can tell is because they hide and they think that nobody sees them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really concerned with just the basic things, and it's almost intuitive of like, you know, get food, get sleep, cry to get what I need. And speaking of the peekaboo thing, another thing that you can think about is the different kinds of games that kids play as they grow up the spiral. Like they might play that peekaboo at the early stages, and then they might get into more kind of imagination, pretend kind of stuff, and then as they get a little bit older, they can be really obsessed with like the rules.
So for the red stage, for instance, the egocentric stage, no, when the child is banging on the floor and I don't want to do it. I do what I want.
Yeah. They play with other people, but they don't really play with them. They're together in the same room, but they're not really interacting very much. Give me that, I'll take that. That's it.
Yeah.
You know.
I have a 5-year-old nephew, and he likes to play race, and he always wins. It's amazing. It's amazing. He likes the game. I win.
And probably he doesn't like the rules. When you say no, this goes in a different way, he wouldn't like, because he needs to win.
He needs to win. That's right.
So you were talking about the later stage, the conventional stage, where the rules become important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at the traditional stage, you also get this idea of the one true way, and speaking in terms of a society, it can actually be like the beginning of community. So often, you know, in our modern and postmodern societies, we want to talk a lot of trash about the traditional stages and stuff like that, because we kind of see it as dogmatic and keeping us down. But if you're a little kid and you're trying to grow and learn, having some rules and some authority can be really important.
Yeah.
And so that's where
indispensable.
It is important.
Yes,
and
yes.
Kids who are growing without rules, who are allowed to do everything, they don't know to orient themselves. They don't have a framework, and they get confused, and they have a hard time to grow up and become functional adults.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I don't mean to jump ahead, but that definitely makes me think of, you know, growing up in a postmodern culture where values are relative. But I don't want to jump ahead too much in the theme. Maybe we should go next to the rational, scientific, materialistic achievers, which are sort of the next. So often, as we know, in reaction to the traditional conformist dogma, people start thinking for themselves and wanting to be to have their individual strengths and abilities and skills recognized.
People want to be recognized for their own in their own selves, as their own authorities.
Yeah. And that's where you get a lot of the libertarian themes and meritocracy, which I would say is one of the big strengths of the capitalist, democratic, individual themes, is this idea of natural growth hierarchy and people's skills being recognized as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But it can go a little bit too far, and it tends to not have responsibility for planetary resources, and there gets to be,
Or for those who are left out.
Yeah, this when it is exaggerated, this orange
Yeah, it does.
national state, you know, where I can do whatever I want,
Yeah.
and I will do whatever I want. And when the previous stage of responding to rules has been led away, we don't have any ethics anymore.
Yep.
So that's what is happening just now.
Yeah, ethics suffers with extreme orange.
so in reaction to the very modern, very rationalist, and often, you know, this very sort of white people conquering kind of style, need to appreciate diversity. These value systems that we have are relative, and all of culture is just a game that we're playing. And so they construct a lot of tradition, a lot of culture, especially because they see a lot of it as really negative and unhealthy, and they try to, they want to extend care to more people, and they want to take on everybody's perspective, and they're starting to see, like, I shouldn't maybe judge other people for who they are because to some extent they're victims to circumstance, and a lot of healthy things come online at that point, but also a lot of contradictions start to happen too, because then, you know, everybody makes judgments, and these people often start judging people for judging. Like, you're such a jerk. How could you judge people? And you know, I mean, if you really look at it, they have to say is really self-contradictory. But that's because they're taking into account all of these multiple factors, and to some extent, you know, I think some of the healthiest versions of green say, I don't know. You know, they're very like skeptical and Socratic in that way. Like, well, I don't know. And I think at the next stage, at the integral stage, we start to integrate diversity with discernment. So take into account more factors, take into account the fact that, yes, value systems are relative, but there's also an objective truth, a subjective truth, and an absolute truth, and we can't reduce it all to just one. And through this integrative view, we've come up with sort of the 5 main lenses that we think are that you have to take to have the most inclusive view. And one of those lenses is stages of development, or levels of development. And one of the main systems that we use to talk about stages of development is spiral dynamics. It's not the only one, but we think that it's a really good one.
Good. So this is what we are talking about today, about spiral dynamics. And at the beginning, we showed you the chart, yeah, about that. And we want to talk about how future generations will go through these spirals, and how this is the expression, for instance, of the red, the egocentric stage, of the other stages. We know how they are now, but you had some interesting ideas about how they can develop in the future, or show in the future. I wouldn't
express
say
themselves.
Express themselves. I
Yeah.
wouldn't use the word develop here. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I was watching this video that I saw on my Facebook, and I forget his name exactly. It was Zachary something, and he was at some kind of an integral conference, and he was talking about spiritual singularity and how in the future if we had an integral society that sort of kids would just like grow up and boom, they would just like be enlightened so fast because
At
their
age
parents
12,
are enlightened,
yes.
and they would just see it in their parents' eyes, and boom. But if you know anything about spiral dynamics, you know that's impossible because everyone has to start at stage 1 of development. And I mean, I think right now they say that they're only 1%-ish, 2% of the world's population is at these higher stages of development. Most people are probably gonna taper out around, blue, orange, and green. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to develop through stages of development, and maybe it could be true that if you had an integrally informed society, they would set it up to in a way that would encourage and foster your growth and development. And I think we would try to do that. But also at the same time, if you had a society that was working really well with top-down integrated leadership, I would also imagine that if there's not struggle, then there probably won't be the need for growth. If there's not pressure, if there's not these forces that move us, then I don't know. And if it was the tradition, if it was the modern way of the society, doesn't that change our idea of the spiral in the first place? Because there will be traditional people, orange academia in our academic systems. They will all be indoctrinated into integral education.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean to even talk about our modern or traditional themes in an integral worldview?
I think we can take this down from the integral into present time, where we are not yet in an integral society. When, for instance, our green culture, green egalitarian culture, is quite spread in America and Northern Europe, and children grow up with parents talking about these things all the time, that everybody has his personal truth, and it's no truth is for everybody, and
we have to care for all the creatures on the planet. We have to be very inclusive and not exclude anybody.
Yeah, and then they have political oppositions, and little children go to the demonstrations and shout, and so they get a certain vocabulary,
yeah,
which they grow up, and it seems to belong to the stage of their parents. I mean, it belongs, the vocabulary. But the child, where is the child?
Yeah. Well, one of the big problems is that the way the inflection happens through the stages. For example, at the really early, like, tribal kind of stages, in our postmodern society, there's some really healthy things going on. Like, for example, you probably won't have racism. That's gonna get curtailed real quick. You know what I mean? So there are some positive translations happening, but I think it does get a little bit troublesome when we start getting into the traditional kind of stages, because what a lot of people do is they wind up adopting the green postmodernist relativistic worldview as their traditional dogma. And in a sense, what also kind of happens is for reasons that suit them, they'll grab these don't judge kind of themes, like though, basically they play the relativism card as a way to protect their ego, so that way they don't ever have to have any scrutiny come under under their opinion. And they're not saying that because they have some kind of post-formal realization where they understand, oh, all these value systems are relative. They're just grabbing for it as a way to not have to look at their ideas more rigorously.
And it's got kind of contemporary catechism that you just repeat, rote in a rote kind of way, and doesn't have any real heart to it.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Exactly. And because they don't have the real honest realization of green, they don't understand the relativism. They don't have the rational discernment that would help them to be able to make these kinds of discriminations in an honest way that they would get at Orange, because that's not a rational argument. They don't have the real lessons that you would learn at a traditional stage, which is to sacrifice my ego now for something bigger and greater. Because you don't really learn that in postmodern values. It's all relativism and don't judge and my personal adventure. It can be very, very narcissistic and very, very kind of touchy-feely. And
it's all about me, and I have the permission, because I have these adapted worldviews, and then it gets consolidated into a tradition. This is wonderful. So you talked
into a box.
Yes. Yeah, you talked about that. When this happens, the development is even more difficult than it is at the moment when we are going through the first, let's say, for the first go through all this.
The first go through all these levels. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because in order to really authentically get to green, they have to get in touch with their rationality. Mm-hmm. And they have to get in touch, before they can really do that, they have to let go of their ego a little bit and take on to the possibility that they could be wrong, that there's something more than them. I mean, one of the main things that I'm interested when I first meet people is I ask them if they grew up in a traditional home. Because I grew up in a really Christian home, and one of the things that I find from a lot of the ex-Christian integralists is when I talk to them, they care a lot about truth because they grew up in a really dogmatic view, and so they've had to work real hard in the rational stage to play catch up. But when they get to integral, they care about truth because they really want to be good. Mm-hmm. Which is, to me, like a very traditional conformist kind of view. It's like, well, if I'm not going to serve this small understanding of God, I'm going to serve God as God, what God really is. You know what I mean? And so you get this higher metaphoric, cosmocentric kind of religiosity with a sort of rational flavor to it.
Underpinning, yes. Mm-hmm.
And teal can be kind of dogmatic. I feel like it's a good kind of, it's got some green in there, but it can also be like, I think it's going to be the new tradition. And when that happens, I think the spiral as we know it will fundamentally change. It's in its expression. If you think about how it's changed all the way up until now, it's kind of just been, it seems like adding layers and building and like correcting the lower levels. But I'm really interested to see what happens, when we move as a society with our leadership into second tier.
What I'm interested in, I mean, I agree what you say. What I'm interested in is still staying in first tier, although this would be needed to explain, but we just leave it like this. What happens when children are not in contact with what you say is the truth, but when they have not passed in a good way the traditional level, because their green parents didn't want to put any rules on them. They didn't want that the children are oppressed, because they immediately made the equation between rules and oppression. You know, and so they try to avoid and let the child do whatever it does. And when this child hasn't passed a good traditional conventional state, when it hasn't adopted rules, when it hasn't understood what is the truth in this moment, in this part of his life, what implication has it for the child?
Well, one thing is they can't go through a rational stage yet either. They can't do the next thing.
Let's ask David.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, like the question is, what happens when you don't get those blue values? Like, he's absolutely right. You're kind of stuck at red, and that's can be a really scary place to be. And the other thing that happens is I think one of the main things that, you know, human beings want in general, like, you know, is respect. And part of that is, like, you know, they want to feel like they're being good. You know, I think even people who we would consider to be horrible people, you know, like Hitler or something like that, he thought he was doing good in his mind. However, you know, whatever, you know, what was good for the German people, according to him. So I think, you know, when you're raised in a postmodern culture where values are totally relative, and you're trying to have kids and they want to be good, but good is nowhere to be found, what do you do? Well, like you say, you know, you do whatever you do. And one of the main problems, you know, as a philosopher thinking about morals and talking to, like, the average person about it, is that most people don't actually have a moral code. What they have is post hoc justifications for whatever it is they decide to do. They make it up as they go, basically. And I struggle with this. Especially this is kind of one of the main things I started thinking about when I was kind of going through my existential awakenings and the breaking downs of the old, coming from that those heavy traditional themes. Like, me and my first wife, we were virgins, and we had only been with each other. And to me, I found a lot of value in the idea of, you know, certain beliefs, even if they were only true as self-fulfilling prophecies or something like that. What kind of values do we project onto the world, and how do we live in a way where we can find that kind of balance between, you know, freedom and responsibility? You know, sex and psychedelic drugs are like good examples of these things that people take for granted, and, you know, they turn them into just the most base expressions of, oh, this feels good, or oh, I see flashy colors, or something like that. And the sad thing is that they fail to find the real treasure inside of the, you know, the psychedelic realization, or the deep connection, the deep spiritual connection with another person. You know what I mean? When it's just bumping and grinding, I don't know how much real fulfillment you're gonna find in that. And I think that's why so many of these people who are raised in the, you know, the green culture are so desperately seeking.
Yeah.
And the way that they seek, and the expressions that it takes, just feel so narcissistic, and like they're trying so hard to over spiritualize the already sacred. You know what I mean? I don't know. if that makes sense. But
I have a clue what you mean. Yes.
And what I'm hearing is that you think, correct me if it's not true, that this is coming out of the lack of traditional values, of ethics, of morals, or because we don't know really what is important and what is not when we are caught into a postmodern stage.
yeah, it just becomes really important not to inflict your values and worldviews on other people, because we've seen that done in the past, we've had it done to us, and we know it doesn't feel good. And so I think there's, you know, like they have this, it's so paradoxical because they have this huge ego, but it's also, you know, dissolving to some extent. So they can be really narcissistic, but they can also be really detached.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're just trying to figure out what they think at that point. You know what I mean?
Okay, I think we all are trying to figure out what we think, and
Don't make me too green, David. Be careful.
Green is beautiful. Green is beautiful. I think we get frustrated with green sometimes because they're so close.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like we agree about so much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you know, I wish you would stand up for it more. I wish we could make better judgments about the things that we say that we care about.
Yeah.
so we need to wrap up a little bit now. And as we are talking about children and the future generation, we landed in green and the green parents who try to avoid their own suffering and their own, you know, growing up through all the stages of development to their children, and try to prevent them from certain experiences.
Yeah.
For instance, by taking overprotection on them and so on. What could you say to those people to allow their children to grow up in a good way?
What would I say to green people that would help them allow their children grow up in a good way?
Yeah, I think we could finish up here in this way, because I guess that people who are listening to us are at least in green and maybe in orange in the rational state, but I probably think they are in green. So
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to have a message to green parents. I don't know if they would recognize my authority.
Nevertheless, you know.
I would say, you know, don't be afraid of making skillful judgments. You know, what you see as skillful judgments for your child while you're caring for them. They'll thank you later for nurturing them and for letting them grow at the pace that is appropriate for them to grow. We all start. We can't think of it in such a flat way. Development is a real thing, and we all start, and we need lots of love and attention, and we need help and support because we don't know anything. We need guidance, and we need wisdom. And then if you do a good job with your kids, if you teach them, you can slowly, you know, get them to be strong and powerful individuals who are out there making good choices in the world. But you know, you gotta teach them in a way that's appropriate for their age, and don't try to do the thing that you're always accusing other people of doing and pushing your values and worldviews on other people.
Actually, that's it. And so don't avoid the conventional stage. Give rules for a certain age to your children and be sure that they obey the rules. They need it. Ask psychologists.
You know, on the other side of that, maybe the one thing that we didn't talk about, I don't know how much time we have for it, but another big problem in development is the modern society and how individualistic and agentic romantic that it is, like childhood development stages, that the whole like, oh, let him cry, oh, you know, like let him fall, this stuff for like a little baby, like the studies have shown that it's those early stages of development are the most important. And I think a lot of your ideas about, you know, whether you feel like the world is a nice and loving, kind place, or whether you think the world is a place that's mean and doesn't give a crap about you, have a lot to do with your original first experiences.
Definitely.
Well, definitely. That's good, and I think that's a topic for another show.
Yeah, and I think we can take that as a sign that we should finish and wrap up this episode, this first episode, and we will meet another time, David, and hopefully with a better internet connection. Okay.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we see you again and continue this.